Hi and welcome to another story, and today we have part 6 of Head Kid by David Baddiel, continuing from chapter 28. Kind of forgot. So, just run it past me again, said Diona. I'm him, said Mr. Carter, pointing at Ryan, who was looking increasingly weary, and he's me, and it's really that simple. You are Ryan. Yeah, but you look like Mr. Carter. I know, that's the big downside. Ha ha, said Ryan. Good one. Think about what it's like for me having to live with this stupid face. Ooh, that's not very teacherly of you, Mr. C, said Mr. Carter. That's hurt my feelings. I may have to report you to Offhead. OK, this is nuts, said Diona, getting up. I don't believe it. Why would we lie about it, said Ryan. We really stand to gain nothing from this lie. I have to say that me and Mr. Carter are for once in agreement, said Mr. Carter. Diona shook her head. It was all very strange. She had just been passing by looking for Ryan when she'd heard Mr. Carter, who she assumed, as she might, was Mr. Carter. What with him looking and sounding like Mr. Carter, say that the school was going to be shut down and seeming happy about that. She'd glanced through the window and then Mr. Carter had beckoned her to come in. She'd gone in and sat down. She'd expected to be told off for eavesdropping or something. What she hadn't been expecting was for Mr. Carter to start explaining that he wasn't Mr. Carter, he was Ryan, and that Ryan was Mr. Carter. OK, if you're Ryan... No, I'm Mr. Carter, said Ryan. Sorry, said Diona, turning around. And if you're Ryan... Got it, said Mr. Carter. Why didn't you tell me this earlier, she demanded. Well, I didn't think you'd believe me, said Mr. Carter. Why do you think I believe you now? Mr. Carter shrugged. I don't know. You've seen all the new rules I've made. They're not very old-style Mr. Carter-ish, are they? They're more old-style Ryan-ish, aren't they? Ryan nodded in agreement. Yes. I don't approve of any of them, he said. And also, said Mr. Carter, pointing to Ryan, he's here now, agreeing with me. Why would Ryan do that? Diona thought for a moment. It could be one of his pranks. One of his pranks, said Ryan wearily, that he'd got the most anti-prankster head teacher of all time to come in on. Now Mr. Carter nodded in agreement. Diona shook her head and sat down again, looking at him closely. I can't believe it, Ryan. You're in Mr. Carter's body. Isn't that weird? What about going to the We've agreed not to discuss that, said Ryan. It's best, said Mr. Carter. Diona looked from one to the other. Are you living in his house? She said to Ryan. That is, Mr. Carter. Yep. Ordered pizzas on his credit card yet? 14 in one night. She said. Maybe it is you, but OK, what's my mum's name? Esther. Who's my favourite singer? Beyoncé. Who's my best friend? Mr. Carter paused. Ryan looked at him, raising an eyebrow. Well, me, I mean him, said Mr. Carter, pointing at Ryan. Diona nodded. She seemed to be taking her time about what to say next, and then she said, But I just heard you say that the school was going to close down because of what you've done, and that you were proud of that, pleased about it. Well, said Mr. Carter, yeah. Even though you know that would be really, really upsetting for me because I'd have to go back to Oakcroft. Oh, said Mr. Carter. He felt a falling in his stomach. He knew this was bad and was about to say, Thing is, what with all the changing bodies thing and the being head teacher thing and the doing whatever I like with the school thing, I kind of forgot about that. But he didn't, mainly because he realised it wouldn't help much. And so you know what, she said, getting up. I'm not sure you are, Ryan, or at least I'm not sure you are my best friend. She was at the door by now, looking back into the room, because my best friend would never, ever do that to me. There was a chance at this point, perhaps, for Mr. Carter to say, OK, no, you're right. I'll do something to stop that happening. But he didn't say this either, because he could see Ryan smirking at him, and he didn't want to back down from his former triumph about the school closing, so he just looked at her and shrugged, like a naughty, told-off little boy, which meant that Diona shook her head, raised her eyebrows, and went out, slamming the door. Oh dear, said Ryan, still smirking. Chapter 29. Other. Sorry, head teacher, said Tina Ward, who was waiting outside the school gates to pick up her son. She had Holly with her in a pushchair. Mr. Carter wasn't really listening. He was looking around. He was looking, in fact, for Diona, who had run away just after he'd seen her in the office. He wanted to reassure her that everything would be okay, although he hadn't quite worked out how to do that yet, or indeed whether it would be. What? Said Mr. Carter distractedly. Oh, never mind, said Tina crossly. She had thought about turning over a new leaf with him by apologising for Ryan's behaviour, but now he just ignored her. She was convinced that he was not a nice person all over again. About what? Said Ryan, appearing at the gates. What are you talking to him for? No, Jan, said Holly. Then looking questioningly at Mr. Carter, she added, Jan? I heard, said Tina, turning to her son, I heard you had to go to his office again. I had hoped the new head might have led to a change in you. I see, said Ryan, nodding. Well, in a sense it has. I'm quite the reformed character. Tina frowned. Ryan was still clearly playing up, speaking in this posh, grown-up way that he'd been doing for a while now. It was annoying. Anyway, nice to see you, Mum, said Mr. Carter, turning to face her properly. Diona was nowhere to be seen, so, in a rather typical 11-year-old boy way, he just decided not to worry any more about the thing that had been really worrying him. I beg your pardon, said Tina. And also, he'd said Mum, so that was something else to worry about. I said... Yes, Mr. Carter, said Ryan fiercely. What did you say? I said, that's all right, chum. Tina frowned. I beg your pardon? Again? It's a new policy. I consider teacher-parent friendliness very important, so all staff will now make sure they address all parents as mate, pal, mule mucker, or indeed chum, said Mr. Carter hurriedly. Ryan stared at him, then very slowly shook his head. OK, said Tina. She frowned but laughed, and added, mate? Thanks, buddy, said Mr. Carter. This made her laugh more. That's all right, comrade, said Tina through her laughter. Friend, said Mr. Carter in a squeaky high voice, putting both his thumbs up. Ooh, friend! This made Tina bellow with laughter. Hey, Ryan, Mr. Carter knows that meme, she said. You know, the one that you showed me from the TV show. Luckily for Ryan, who was looking very confused and still shaking his head, this was the moment Holly decided to shout out, pointing at him. No, Jan! No, Jan! Oh, not again, said Tina. It is Ryan. Holly? No, Jan, other. Yes, said Ryan. Exactly. The thing is, Mum, I genuinely believe that the baby might possess some kind of insight here. Did you hear her call me other, as in not Ryan? Oh, for goodness sake, said Tina. You know perfectly well she's saying brother. You know she never says words properly. Doesn't she, said Ryan. It's never too early to try phonics, I always say. Tina just stared at him. Yes, well, anyway, my point is I think she may be actually perceiving the truth in a deeper way than you as an adult can comprehend, and... Ryan, stop talking like that and go and get in the car. Car? You? We only live over there. Yes, but we're not going home, we're going to see Annie. Ocklet, said Holly, trying a different tack. Tina tutted. Excuse me a moment, she said, pushing the chair away a little and crouching down to sort out the baby. Who's Annie? Ryan asked Mr. Carter quietly. My great-aunt, Mum's aunt, replied Mr. Carter. Oh, super. What's she like? Nice, but farts a lot. Like a lot. Ryan sighed. Great. Really great. It's kind of funny. Now you see, Ryan, that is typical of you. I'm sure it's not her fault if she has stomach issues, and it's very important to take that kind of issue in old people seriously. OK, I've always found the only way to get through is to laugh about it. She doesn't seem to mind. But whatevs. Tina came back to them, pushing the pushchair. I thought I'd told you to get in the car, she said to Ryan. I'm sorry, Mr. Carter. I really don't know what's got into him at the moment. I really don't know either, partner, said Mr. Carter. Friend, said Tina in a squeaky voice, doing the thumbs up thing. Then Mr. Carter joined in and together they went, ooh, friend, teacher friend, parent friend. And it seemed as if they were never going to stop, so Ryan sighed and walked towards the car. Chapter 30. Brashoo. OMG, said Tina. I'm not even joking, but something has happened to that man, something good. Has it? Said Ryan flatly. They were sitting together on a sofa in Aunt Annie's living room. Auntie Annie, herself a tiny woman with an enormous behind, had gone to make some tea. The living room looked as if it had last been decorated in 1957. There was a lot of glass cabinets dotted around the place, containing plates and mugs, commemorating various events in the life of the British royal family. A very old, very thin-looking cat with no teeth stared at them from the opposite sofa. Yes, just now I found myself really warming to him. But before, there was that whole business with your funny fainting spell in the hospital, which turned me right against him. And then he seemed so stuffy and strict at the parents' open afternoon. And of course he was so angry with you about the tortoise thing, which was, let's face it, quite funny. Was it? Yes. Up with your best. So, I didn't take to him at all. Didn't you? Said Ryan. No, he seemed all right. Yes, all right, Tina, said Ryan. Can you stop going on about it? You haven't stopped talking about him all the way here. Tina shrugged. Oh, well, all I'm saying is he seems to have loosened up a lot, which, by the way, is the opposite of what seems to have happened to you. And I've told you, stop calling me Tina. Hello, loves, said Auntie Annie, coming in with a china teapot and some cups on a tray that had a picture of a steam train on it. Shall I be mother? She set the tray down in front of Tina and Ryan. Aki. She hasn't made me any cake, darling, said Tina to Holly, who was on her knee, grabbing at the air. You skit. Sorry, Annie. Have you got any? Asked Tina. Benny? Asked Annie. looking around as she poured the tea. He's dead. This cat's called Chairman Meow. No, Annie, said Tina more loudly. Switch your hearing aid on. John? He died years ago. Your hearing aid. She pointed at her aunt's ear, where indeed there was a hearing aid lodged inside. It's off. Yes, he had a very bad cough, she said, handing over a cup to Tina. She settled herself down on the armchair. That's what killed him. There was a pause after this for about a split second before Holly burst out laughing. Art! Art! What are you saying? What are you saying, little one? Said Annie in an old lady speaking to her baby voice, bending her face down close to Holly's and wrinkling her nose. And to be honest, so were Tina and Ryan, and now indeed the baby, but for different reasons. She's so adorable, isn't she? The sweetest thing. Oh dear, said Tina. She's always worse when she forgets to put the hearing aid on. It's like she can't hear that she's doing it. Can't she? Said Ryan. Feel that? I don't think she's got much feeling. You know, around there. Tina said the words around there in a whisper, which Ryan felt was frankly unnecessary. Have a cup of tea, Ryan. 3 sugars. No, thank you. I take it back. Take it black. No sugar. Could you hear something then? Said Aunt Annie, as she dropped 3 sugar lumps into Ryan's milky tea and handed it over, like a distant quack, like someone stood on a duck's foot. Art! What are you saying, little one? Iskit! Should we do something? Said Ryan to Tina under his breath, while Aunt Annie's attention was distracted. Aunt Annie, at this point, got up from the sofa and was bending over to put her face close to the baby's. That's right, I'm bending over. What do you mean? Said Tina. Well, call a doctor. I mean, something's clearly wrong. The responsible thing to do would be to get some medical help. Tina frowned at him. She's been like this for years. There's nothing wrong with her, and you know better out than in. It would just upset her to point it out. Anyway, you normally just laugh at it. Well, that's awful. I shouldn't have done. I'm a changed man. Oh, yes, I forgot, said Tina. You're actually your new head teacher. Yes, I am. Isn't this proof that it's true? Because I'm not laughing? Tina looked at him. Dip. You want a dip? That's very grown up. Hummus. Yogurt. Tarmasalata. We'll see, said Tina. Ryan frowned. Did Tina Ward really think that just because who was really not an 11-year-old boy, but a responsible, sensible, serious 43-year-old head teacher, ding, would collapse into laughter just because Aunt Annie had a small, well, not so small problem with her digestion? What about the smell? Said Ryan. It's getting worse, I agree, said Tina. No, I mean about her not knowing she's doing it. Surely even if Aunt Annie is deaf and a little numb downstairs, her nose works, doesn't it? Which, to be fair, was a relevant question to ask at this point, as the air in the room, never that fresh, frankly, was turning a little green. Ooh, Elsa, ooh. What does Holly want? Blue. I've got a crayon somewhere. Oh, my goodness. Aunt Annie sat back down on her chair. What is that smell, dearie? Dearie me, have you noticed it, Tina? Ryan, oh, I say that's awful. Ryan turned to Tina with a I told you so expression. He folded his arms as if to say, now, please, can we take this seriously? You know what this means, continued Annie, turning to her side. Chairman Meow. The ancient cat, quite surprisingly, since one might have assumed him to be deafer even than his owner, looked up confused. Please stop doing that, you smelly cat. I've told you before, you have to try to control your flatulence. It's making a terrible smell. Shh. And it's antisocial for everyone here. Do you understand? Meow. Good. Brush. She lifted up the teapot, smiling. Anyone for more tea? And at that point, Ryan burst out laughing. He laughed and laughed and laughed in a way that the head teacher inside him for many years had not. He laughed so much, in fact, that he farted. Chapter 31. A message for Mr. Carter. While Ryan was at Aunt Annie's, Mr. Carter went back to Mr. Carter's flat. He was still troubled about Diona. He took off the suit jacket and sat on Mr. Carter's not very comfy black leather sofa, wondering what to do. He tried watching TV, but not only was the screen quite tiny, all the series links were for channels called things like History and Geographic and Natural, so there wasn't anything exciting recorded for him to watch. Perhaps I should call Mum, he thought. She would know what's best. Then he realised he couldn't do that, or at least it would take a lot of explaining and she wouldn't believe him, and even if she did, he doubted that at the end of it she'd be very interested in answering the question. So, Anyway, what should I say to Diona to make her like me again? He got up and rummaged through the 14 cardboard pizza boxes strewn around the living room to see if there were any bits of delicious stuffed crust left. But since he'd already done this last night, there weren't. He went back to the jacket, took out Mr. Carter's credit card and went over to the phone. When he picked up the receiver, though, he wasn't sure about ordering pizza again. He didn't know how much money Mr. Carter actually had in the bank account, and he didn't want to spend it all on pizza. Plus, it didn't feel quite as thrilling and fun just to do it again. He suddenly had an image of him ordering pizza every night, stretching into the future, and it didn't feel fun at all. In truth, he wasn't that hungry. He just felt a tiny bit lonely. He even thought to himself, looking at the boxes, Itza. Just because it was his baby sister, that's what she would have said. Or maybe Itza Ox. He'd like to have heard that. It would have made him laugh and cheered him up. Then he noticed that on the main phone console there was a light blinking, which meant there was a message for him. Well, not for him, for Mr. Carter, so maybe he should ignore it. But then again, it was blinking, and Ryan felt a tiny bit lonely. At least it would be good hearing another voice. So he pressed the button. "Hello," said a worried-sounding female voice on the machine. "This is a message for Mr. Carter. It's Zadie at St. Winifred's. Your mum has taken a bit of a turn for the worse, I'm afraid. She's stable at the moment, but maybe you should come down as soon as you can. Thanks, all the best, Zadie." Oh, I said that already. Anyway, bye. Chapter 32. Really nice. Back at the Ward's house, meanwhile, there was an after effect from the visit to Aunt Annie's. It may have been caused by laughing more than he, Mr. Carter inside Ryan, that is, had for years. Or it may have been too much breathing in the, fumes, but Ryan suddenly felt a bit queasy. So he went to bed. Mr. Carter had been ill quite a lot when he was a child, but it still felt strange as a grown man to go to bed at 6 p.m, particularly under a duvet with pirates on it. A duvet, in fact, that Ryan, in Ryan's body, had been telling Tina for some time that he'd grown out of. But then Tina came in and asked if he was okay, and Ryan said he still felt a bit sick, but not too bad. So she put a hand on his forehead and kissed him on the cheek, and then tucked him in and told him not to worry. She was sure he'd feel better soon. And that didn't feel strange. That felt nice. Really nice. Chapter 33. That's my problem. Standing outside Mrs. Carter's room, waiting to be let inside by the nurse, Mr. Carter, feeling very much like who he really was, Ryan, wondered why he'd come. In Mr. Carter's flat, having heard the message, he'd suddenly felt he should. In the forefront of his mind, it was just that he felt sorry for Mr. Carter's mum. He didn't think that she should have to be on her own in hospital just because he and her son had switched bodies. He realised after thinking this that the word just was a bit odd in the sentence. But in the back of his mind, he knew it was because he'd wanted to talk to his mum, and Mrs. Carter at this moment kind of was his mum. It was a funny sort of hospital, St. Winifred's. Mr. Carter had got there easily. He'd passed it many times, as Ryan, on the way to and from school, and he'd never been inside before. It didn't have a big reception area, like most hospitals, with lots of people queuing, and babies crying, and the odd man with a bleeding head shouting at his wife about how he hadn't been drinking. Well, not that much, anyway. It was very quiet and carpeted and calm, more like the bed and breakfast in Dorset to which his mum took him and Holly for their summer holidays. And instead of having to spend ages with a harassed-looking person in front of a computer trying to work out which ward the patient he was trying to visit was in, Zadie, the nurse, just met him at the door and led him across the hallway to Mrs. Carter's room. "I don't know if she's awake," said Zadie in a very hushed voice. "She's been sleeping a lot." "OK," said Mr. Carter, "but I'm sure she'll be pleased to see you, if she wakes up." Mr. Carter nodded, but inside Ryan was nervous. Mrs. Carter sounded sicker than he'd realised. Plus, the idea of anyone being pleased to see Mr. Carter seemed weird to him. In fact, the idea of Mr. Carter having a mum, of any teacher having a mum or dad, had never really occurred to him before. But there it was, a sign on the outside of the door. Grace Carter. Quietly, Zadie opened the door. Inside was a pleasant room, all painted in white, with a view of a garden through the window, and at the far end of the room stood a bed. In it, propped up a little by pillows, was an old lady, asleep. She had white hair and a sweet face. You wouldn't have known she was ill, except for a tube that went from a machine at the side of the bed into her nose. "I'll leave you. Just call if you need anything," said Zadie, shutting the door. "Don't," Mr. Carter wanted to say. "Don't leave." But he was stuck being an adult, being more of an adult than he'd had to be so far, and so he just nodded. He went over to the bed. Grace Carter was breathing in a shallow way. As he sat down on the chair next to the bed, her eyes half opened. She smiled and frowned at the same time, as if the smiling caused her some pain. "Michael," she said, "how nice of you to come." "Michael," thought Mr. Carter. "Who's Michael?" Then he realised, "Oh, it's me. Well, Mr. Carter. That's okay, he said uncertainly. Then more uncertainly, how are you? She smiled again and frowned again. You know, I've been better, but mustn't complain. Well, you could. She opened her eyes a bit more. Pardon? I'm just saying, if I were you, I'd be complaining a lot. I always complain when I'm ill. He was about to say, Mum says, and then remembered that would sound strange. Grace shook her head, but continued to smile. Not really, Michael. You were always very stoic. Stoic? Yes, when you were ill, which was quite a lot when you were little, you would always just sit there and hardly ask for anything. It was all I could do to get you to stay off school. Oh, right, yeah, I forgot. Grace carried on looking at him. Then she said, You know, darling, now that we're talking about all that, about things in the past, I don't want to leave too many things unsaid. Right, he said, not really understanding what this meant. I think that happens a lot, you know, at times like these when there maybe isn't much time left, and then people, they regret it. They regret what they didn't say. Right. And I think Dad, when he was alive, maybe encouraged you to be a little, you know, stiff upper lip and all that. To not really say how you feel because he wasn't very comfy, was he, with feelings? And I wouldn't want you to be like that, to think you couldn't say how you feel. Okay. Because even though you are like your father in many ways, in some other ways, like when I look at you now, I see the little boy inside you, the little boy you once were. He's still there, I think, even though he's forced to wear this big, stern, grown-up suit of armour for a body the whole time. She reached out, and he took her hand in his. It was thin and light, but warm. She was looking at him more closely now. Michael, are you crying? Am I? He realised he was. Oh dear, I'm sorry. You never cry. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, the one that wasn't holding hers, and sniffed. Sorry. No, it's okay, Michael, really. That's exactly what I'm talking about. She paused, still smiling, but a tear, just one, dropped slowly from her right eye, shining down her cheek. I'm glad, really. She squeezed his hand. Hello, said Zadie, coming softly into the room. Sorry, Grace, Michael, but it's time for Grace to have some of her pain-killing medication. Mr. Carter looked around. Grace let go of his hand. She nodded. You'd better go, darling. Thank you so much for coming. I know you have a lot of work to do. He nodded and got up. Zadie went round the other side of Grace and started preparing a syringe. Especially with the new school. How's it going? Said Mr. Carter, putting his coat back on. Well, actually, it might get closed down. If we fail the inspection, which is in 6 days' time. Suddenly, with a sharp pang, he thought of Diona. You think you can turn it around? She asked. He said again. This was a tough one, but all at once it came to him. To Ryan Ward, inside the body of Michael Carter, the head teacher of Brackett Wood School, he knew exactly what to say. Listen, Mum, don't you worry about that. That's my problem. And he walked out the door. And that is where we will leave part 6 of Head Kid by David Baddiel. I'll be back soon with the next part of this fantastic story and lots more stories and videos coming your way very soon. If you'd like to subscribe or hit a like, that's always appreciated. Thanks for listening, guys. Take care. Bye-bye.